Yellow and Red, mixed by Digits 27, Chapter 18. Toyuya was up early. That alone was enough to give her the kind of air that makes people go out of their way to avoid her. She loved her sleep, always lying in until the last possible minute that she could scrounge. This was almost in direct contrast to many of the Kunoichi and Konoha who need to get up early to perfect their looks. Toyuya used to sneer at girls like that in Tsuna, unfit to become Kunoichi at all if they were more concerned with their appearance than their skills in combat. Why was she up early? Naruto. It always comes back to that irritation. A knucklehead ineffectually happy blonde idiot. That wasn't the full extent of words Toyuya could use to describe her friend, but it was a decent microcosm. She just couldn't face him right now. Every time she saw him since that godforsaken kiss on the Hokage monument, her cheeks would flare red like she was trying to impersonate a tomato. Instead, she was breaking her own rule about sleeping in so that she could beat her friend to the rise and do absolutely nothing. There was a reason she didn't get up in the mornings. They were just so useless to her. She enjoyed trainings as much as the next shinobi, but it always felt so utterly pointless in the morning when your eyes hurt to look at the sky. So now she was trapezing around the village with her head hanging low, looking out for anything that might catch her interest and take her mind off the Kyubi Jinchuriki. That was how she found herself standing right outside Ichiroku's ramen, staring up at the sign for a good 2 minutes until the girl working behind the counter noticed her. Hello, can I help you? Toyuya looked around in confused eyes until she spotted the thin brunette. Uncharacteristically, she smiled weakly, a little embarrassed at being caught gawking at nothing in particular. She ducked under the flaps that separated the small stand from the busy streets and sat down on one of the stools. Hi. It was a start, she guessed. It actually surprised her a little. Normally she wasn't even that good at talking to strangers without some kind of barb in the words. Even so, there was just something about the kindly girl behind the counter that sucked any of the potential venom from her words. There was nothing particularly special about her. Simple long brown hair tied up with a cloth and a typical waitress outfit, a white blouse with a blue apron. It was more her demeanor. She had a natural kindly face with a smile that, while well rehearsed and worn, was no less comforting and genuine. Her eyes also spoke of innocence and kindness, obviously having never seen any true hardship in her life like she, Naruto, or Gaara had. Even so, there was just something not quite visible about her that told of understanding and compassion for somebody used to the more jaded side of life, with bandits and people that would stab you in the back. It was unsettling for Toyuya. Could I get used to anything? Even her voice was soft with just the faintest hint of natural humor. This was somebody you couldn't find a reason to dislike. Well, what have you fucking got? Now that you wouldn't give it a good shot, the waitress, ever her versed in people's mannerisms, didn't even flinch from the language. She merely maintained her warm smile. I would recommend the miso ramen since it's our specialty. Toya just nodded tiredly as the girl sent the order back to the elderly man in the kitchen, who she quickly gleamed as her father. So, unless you aren't getting the diet ramen, the voice didn't come from the waitress. It came from behind Toya, making her wonder who had the balls, or lack thereof, seeing as the voice was decidedly feminine, to judge her. She turned on the chair to see the platinum blonde girl that she vaguely remembered from the tuning exams preliminary matches. Yeah, what of it, Twiggy? Toya just gave her nickname as the first thing that came to mind. For a Kunoichi, the girl was startlingly thin. Strangely enough, the strange Kunoichi Nin seemed to take the comment as a compliment and sat down in the stool next to Toyuya with a smug smile. Aren't you watching your figure? Toyuya narrowed her eyes. That was an all too strange comment for a ninja. Figure? What the hell are you talking about? I train every day for at least 4 fucking hours. What the hell would I need to watch what I eat? The blonde seemed to be put off by the retort, apparently thinking over the answer but not finding it to her liking. If her brief shake of the head was anything to go on. Isn't there a boy you like? Now Toyuya was seriously put off. Who was this girl and why the hell did she care about this crap? What the fuck have boys got to do with anything? The other girl seemed just as put off by that answer as Toyuya had by the question. Her eyes went wide as if Toyuya was speaking some kind of abhorrent blasphemy. Are you saying there are no boys that you like? Toyuya really wanted to escape right now. Not only were these questions getting on her nerves, they were beginning to get embarrassing. Of course, she knew what the other girl meant when she said like, but Toyuya hopefully played innocent would get her to just leave her alone. Of course, my two best friends are guys. The blonde seemed somewhat placated by that, even though she was a little wary of the fact that the girls seemed to have no friends that were girls. Well, that explains your appearance. Okay, that was the final straw. Tayuya was just about to rearrange the blonde girl's oh so precious face, and she would have if the waitress didn't come back with her ramen. She decided it would be better for everyone, herself included, if she just ignored the blonde girl and her incessant questions. I'm Ino, by the way. What's your name? Tayuya just grunted between mouthfuls, hoping that Ino would get the message and leave. No such luck. So, what are the guys like in the sand village? I bet they're really tanned, aren't they? Tayuya narrowed her eyes again, still not bothered to turn and face the other girl. It's like kind of rude to not talk when somebody's speaking to you. Tayuya only laughed mid-bite and managed to muffle uh-huh. By now, Ino looked about ready to leave, much to Tayuya's relief. However, when the redhead finished her meal in a very Naruto-esque fashion, the other girl gained a devilish smile. Well, if there aren't any boys that you like, then allow me to introduce you to the only boy you'll ever like. Tayuya only managed to furrow her brow in a questioning manner before she was practically dragged out of the ramen stand. She only just managed to chuck the money to cover the meal at the surprise waitress before she was rounded the corner and out of sight. Now that she had her bearings, she wrenched her arm out of the other girl's grasp, noting that it didn't take much effort on her part, as Ino wasn't all that physically strong. What the fuck are you doing? Ino just smiled at her stupidly, her mind obviously elsewhere. Come on, I'm going to take you to Sasuke. Tayuya tried to back away, but Ino once again took her arm. I don't give a shit about Sasuke. I just want to go train. Again, Ino didn't even seem to hear her. Yeah, he's mostly over by the training grounds, she sighed dreamily. He's so committed as a shinobi. Tayuya just mumbled something under her breath about how committed this girl should be with a wet ass grip like this. Even so, she just decided to go with it. She was heading towards the training grounds anyway, and it wasn't like she had something better to do. However, that didn't mean she was going to allow herself to be dragged around by a kunoichi half her weight, and from the sound of things, half her IQ too. She once again wrenched her arm out of Ino's hardly vice-like grip and walked at a fairly sedate pace behind her. Ino seemed annoyed that the girl wasn't ecstatic about seeing Sasuke, but she was at least following now, so she didn't have to keep pulling her around. She found it a little odd that the flaming red-haired girl was much heavier than herself, yet at the same time her figure was still quite trim. She wondered if the girl was right about doing all that training. She didn't look particularly muscular, but she was obviously strong. So, what about your friends? Tayuya just looked at her in a way that very clearly said, what about them? Ino just rolled her eyes and moved closer before conspiratorially whispering, what are they like? Tayuya stopped still on the path, glaring at the blonde before her who just ignored the heated look. That blonde kid you're with was pretty cute. Nothing on Sasuke, of course, but I guess you have to take what you can get. Tayuya found herself becoming strangely heated, hearing this strange girl talk about Naruto in that way. What was even stranger was the feeling she received when Ino compared him to some other guy. She kept up her glare the rest of the way. The blonde didn't actually think much of it. She was obviously the type who just enjoyed the sound of her own voice. They eventually reached the appropriate training ground, even though with every step Tayuya was regretting not running away more and more. They merged into a relatively large clearing with 3 wooden posts driven into the ground off to one side. It was bordered on one side by trees and on the other by a large crystal clear lake. It was ideal for training purposes due to its inclusion of all the possible elements: water in the lake, earth beneath their feet, wind all around them, and fire. Well, fire came from pure chakra manipulation, and that could be practiced anywhere. There he is. Isn't he dreamy? Tayuya just looked vaguely annoyed that the blonde had once again decided to interrupt her thoughts. However, when she looked in the direction the girl was offhandedly pointing, she noticed the black-haired kid that defeated Kiba in the preliminaries. He was currently engaged in a rather heated spar with his sensei, the tall, silver-haired scarecrow that had sealed her curse mark. Even thinking about it made her subconsciously reach back to rub the spot it was ingrained on. What? The kid with the duck's ass for a haircut? Ino looked around, completely appalled by the way Tayuya had described the boy she had a crush on. What are you talking about? Sasuke's hair does not look like a duck's, that. Tayuya grinned. She was glad that she was finally the one annoying the other. Oh, sure. Look, you just need the right angle. She quickly whipped behind Ino, grabbing the other girl's arms and reaching around her to make a camera-like symbol with her hands focused on Sasuke. See, look, there's the feathers sticking up. She angled the shot around some more, and that's the ass. Ino finally wringed out of the stronger girl's hold and turned to look at her angrily, desperately trying to cover up the fact that she had actually seen what Tayuya meant. Yeah, well, that Naruto's guy hair looks like, Taya choked and Taya cocked an eyebrow, wondering why the girl would think she cared if Naruto's hair looked like anything at all. For that matter, she wondered why Ino cared what she thought of Sasuke's hair. Shouldn't the fact that there wasn't another girl vying for his attention to be a good thing? When Ino couldn't come up with anything, partly due to the fact that she had actually been admiring the shaggy and wild look of Naruto's hair in the preliminaries, her whole body seemed to slump. What's so great about this fucking Sasuke guy anyway? Ino looked like she was ready to rattle off an entire list, and then some. So quickly, Tayuya raised her arm and dismissed any more conversation. You know what? I couldn't give a flying fuck. Ino still seemed determined to prove that her Sasuke was the greatest, and Tayuya could already see her mouth opening to do just that. Before she could, however, no doubt leading to Tayuya kicking her across the clearing into the lake, everyone in the vicinity heard an enormous crash coming from further into the forest. It was loud enough to catch the attention of the two sparring shinobi in the middle of the field, who looked around in surprise. Sasuke only seemed to notice at that moment the two newcomers at the edge of the training ground. He was used to girls like Ino coming to watch him train, but the red-haired girl was new. He sighed deeply, thinking it was another annoying fangirl. When he looked closer, he realized she was one of the ones at the preliminaries, the one that was beaten by Lee. He had seen that she was trying what she was trying to do, scope out her opponent with taijutsu before falling into her preferred fighting style. It was only unfortunate it was Rock Lee she was facing, or the tactic may have worked in her favor. As it was, it left him not knowing her abilities or skill level. He didn't like not knowing these things. He walked over to them, completely ignoring the large crash that had diverted his attention their way in the first place. "You're not another fangirl, are you?" He said it with an annoyed sneer, which made Tanya want to laugh out loud. Instead, she settled on her own sneer of derision. "Yeah, you wish, duck boy." He seemed momentarily confused by the comment, especially when he noticed Ino stifling a small giggle before she turned to Tayuya in badly acted annoyance. At that moment, Tayuya couldn't really have cared less about the annoying Uchiha in front of her. She was much more curious about what made the loud noise. At that moment, Kakashi decided to suddenly appear before the Genin, startling all three, even if the two hid it better than the other. "You should be nicer, Sasuke. This was the girl who saved you in the Forest of Death." Ino suddenly looked across at Tanya in what could only be described as the perfect mix of awe and utter jealousy. Sasuke took another appraising look at the girl, noticing the sealed mark on her neck that could have very well been on his own without her intervention. "Thanks then," it was said fairly pathetically, out of formality more than anything else, but it only doubled the jealous look Ino was shooting at her. Tayuya just shrugged and began walking away, much to the surprise of the three gathered. "Hey, where are you going?" It was Ino who called out, so Tayuya completely ignored the girl. As she strode off in the direction she heard the noise coming from, Ino furtively glanced between the red-haired girl and her crush that had decided to go back to training after the momentary disturbance, knowing by now that Sasuke wouldn't give her the time of day until his training was over, and then he might still ignore her. She took off after the interesting girl, who was somehow immune to Sasuke's appeal. "Hey, where are you going? We could have watched Sasuke train for a while." Even though Tayuya had drawn a pretty good picture of what this girl was like by now, she still shot a disbelieving look behind her. "I'm a ninja. Why the hell would I want to do that when I could just go fucking train myself?" Thankfully for Tayuya, that shut Ino up for a while as she wrestled with the answer. They walked on in relative silence, drawing closer to the origin of the strange noises that reverberated throughout the forest. Finally, she could see what looked like a clearing up ahead and jogged over to where the trees ended. "All right, come at me with everything you've got," she groaned as the familiar voice rang out across the training ground. Immediately, she felt like slinking away before Naruto noticed her if he hadn't already. Luckily, he seemed focused on his training as he faced off against three of his shadow clones. She tried to walk away, but by that time Ino had caught up to her and was curiously poking her head through into the clearing to see what was making Tayuya so obviously uncomfortable. Naruto was standing on top of the river with three shadow clones, all in different taijutsu stances. His jacket was off to one side so that it wouldn't get wet, which left him in just his black pants and a navy shirt that clung to his damp body, showing off his muscles. He had also removed his headband so it lay on top of his jacket, leaving his wild hair to freely fall across his forehead, partly obscuring his vision. He did this to give him the most disadvantages possible against the clones to make the training that much harder. Ino couldn't stop the blush that rushed across her cheeks as she watched Naruto fighting himself across the water in perfectly trained attacks that viciously fought back the clones despite their numerical superiority. When one clone poofed out of existence, thanks to many solid blows, Naruto just made another, constantly maintaining the 3 enemies that came at him. It was an intensive chakra excessive training method that helped him refine his taijutsu style. What Ino was focused on was the way that his tight t-shirt clung to his body and the way his muscles flexed with every punch or kick. She was captivated by the supposedly foreign boy's startling blue eyes. Right now they had a hardened edge thanks to their focus on the fight at hand. The strange whisker-like marks on his cheeks were cut in the way they made him unique. She excitedly turned around to face Taija, who just now beginning to sneak away from the scene while Ino was captivated. "That's your teammate?" Taija just brought a finger up to her lips and shot the girl an annoyed look. "Shut up, he's scarred here like a fucking bat." Ino completely disregarded the other girl, and the huge smile plastered over her face just told her she wasn't done with the questions. Taija groaned again, but quietly, so as to not alert Naruto to hear her presence. The last thing she needed right now was an awkward conversation with her friend in front of this annoying girl. "He's cute. You have to tell me about him." The girl snarled and began walking off in the opposite direction while Ino rushed after her, the same puppet-like smile on her features. Naruto thought it was the strangest thing. He was in the middle of training, fighting off a few of his clones, and he thought he had small Taija and some other unknown person. The distraction caused him to lower his guard, and one of the clones got a powerful blow in, almost knocking him into the water. He quickly rejoined the fight, but by the time her strength had gone, he shrugged it off as the unfamiliar force playing tricks on him. Despite the intensity of his training, Naruto's thoughts were elsewhere. Surprisingly, they weren't on Taija, despite the girl being the center of his focus for the past few days. He felt as though she had been avoiding him recently, and every time he tried to talk with her, she would run off saying she had training to do. He would grumble about it, but in truth, he had a lot of his own training to do in preparation for the Chunin exam finals. That was what occupied his thoughts as he dodged yet another sweeping blow from a clone he had dubbed Clone A. Mainly, he thought about his first fight with Neji. Right now, he was doing his more generic fights and skill sharpening exercises, but sooner or later he would have to do some more specific training. The main area of concern was Neji's gentle fist style of fighting. He knew only one person who could help him with that. With a sigh, he dispelled all his clones and gathered up all his gear, electing to leave his headband off for the moment as it tended to get a bit sweaty if he left it on all day. He hopped through the village, always careful to keep off the beat track by sticking to alleys and rooftops. He knew there was no real concern to be this cautious, but he couldn't help it. Even though he could now easily protect himself, it would bring too many memories. Soon, he was in front of the large gates of the Hyuga compound. He remembered how he knew where it was with a large grin. Hopefully the Hyugas wouldn't though. Originally the prank had just been to spread the Hyuga's laundry all across the village in easy to reach places. No real harm done. It wasn't his fault that some pervert had taken it upon themselves to go around taking some of the more unmentionable items. With only a momentary hesitation, Naruto knocked on the vast gate, only for it to be immediately opened by a tall, thin man with the characteristic eyes that marked him as a Hyuga. "Yes." Naruto scratched his head. He had hoped for a little more time to come up with a more eloquent way stating why he was here. "Hi, can I talk to you, Hinata?" He mentally shrugged. It sounded alright to him. The older man scrutinized him for a moment, thankfully without the Byakugan active. Eventually his gaze softened and he nodded before leading Naruto through the winding compound out into a large courtyard. Naruto smiled as he saw Hinata going through an excessively complicated kata with a young girl with straight brown hair as the target. Hinata noticed Naruto as soon as he came into the courtyard and deviated from the standard kata. She quickly incapacitated the younger girl. Hanabi cried out in annoyance at the dirty trick, but quieted down when she too noticed the newcomer. Hinata curtly walked over to him with a small smile. "Hello, Naruto." He gave his own smile and waved in greeting. Hey Hinata, I was wondering if I could get your help. She raised an eyebrow at that, but nodded with a small smile that was steadily growing. My first fight in the finals is with Neji, so I figured you'd be the best person to come to about advice regarding his style. She nodded slowly, and Naruto didn't notice her smile briefly diminish in size. Yes, I suppose you're right. However, without an extremely intensive course into our style, which I wouldn't be able to give you anyway, I'm not sure how I can help you. Naruto frowned at that. He hadn't expected them to outright teach him the style, but he still wanted some help. I don't know. Is there some kind of way to block the strikes? Naruto gave a small, tinkling laugh that eased some of Naruto's frustration. Naruto, you're asking me to give away my family's style and its secrets? He smiled sheepishly while rubbing the back of his head. When she said it that way, then the request did sound a bit stupid. Oh, right. She laughed again, causing Naruto to smile more out of necessity than amusement. Sorry, but I can't help you, Naruto, as much as I want to see Neji be beaten in the final. She smirked at the thought. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll beat him anyway. Naruto nodded, already making a move to turn and leave, but he stopped, remembering something that had been nagging at him for a while. Yeah, Hinata, what was all that crap Neji was spouting when he beat you? Isn't he your family? Hinata immediately went quiet at that, the smile vanishing off of her face before the last words was out of her mouth. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say something rude. He couldn't tell that the subject was obviously troubling the young Hyuga Harris, so he decided to drop it. Never mind, I'll just go. See you around, Hinata. She didn't answer him as he left, so he hurriedly made his way out of the compound. Boy, that was weird. Yeah, you're telling me? Naruto nearly jumped into the middle of the street as Kyuubi's voice rumbled through his head. Hey, I told you to stop surprising me like that. She just chuckled lightly. Sure, and babies will start growing on trees. Naruto didn't have a comeback for that, partly because he was embarrassed about where babies did in fact come from, of which he had no clue. Oh well, you see, when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much, they hold their hands together, squeeze their eyes closed really tight, and make a wish. Then after appeasing Kami with the ritual sacrifice of a newborn goat, a baby appears. Naruto gave the laughing fox an eternal scowl if such a thing was possible. Ha ha ha, very funny. He only felt her nod in his head. Yeah, I thought so too. He bit back his next retort, now actually wondering where babies did in fact come from. Perhaps he will have to take Hana up on that offer she made him. However, right now, training was more on the forefront of his mind. Oh well, in that case, I figured I would tell you that I can unseal your tenketsu if the Hyuga seals them with those magic fingers of his. Huh, what are you talking about? He heard a sigh from inside of his head, which made him scowl. Every time Kyuubi sighed, it meant she was silently thinking he was being an idiot. Not every time, anyway. I can force my chakra through your tenketsu if they get sealed, which will reopen them. I can only do that once, though. After that, it's all down to you. Naruto gave her a mental nod so as to not freak out any passing civilian who might just think he was crazy. It was useful information to know, and it would certainly surprise Neji if it ever came to pass. Of course, this was merely a backup plan or a what-if scenario, but the information was appreciated nonetheless. As he was walking, he spotted Takuya going down the street in front of him with the blonde-haired girl trailing behind her. He smiled to himself. It was good that she was making friends. He was so worried that she wouldn't talk to anybody but him and Gaara this entire time. Why won't you leave me alone? Takuya was at her wit's end. She was so close to just turning around and kicking the girl across the village. In fact, so far it had been an amazing show of restraint on her part due to her not wanting to cause some kind of international incident. Because you haven't told me everything yet. In truth, Takuya hadn't told Ino anything, but that didn't stop the girl from digging. Pretty soon, she felt like she might just tell the girl anything she wanted to hear, so she would piss off and leave her alone, exactly as Ino planned. Ugh! Takuya picked up the pace only for Ino to match it. Soon, she was just going to sprint. Naruto watched the two leave still with a smile. At least she was talking to somebody, even if it wasn't him. They seemed to be heading in the direction of the hot springs, and if Naruto had to admit it, that sounded like a really good idea right now. He was still pretty worked up from his exercise, and hadn't warmed down properly, so his muscles were quite tense. A good long soak would do him some good right now, not to mention he would be relaxing. So 10 minutes later, he was emerging from the springs building with only a towel wrapped around his waist. He looked out over the steaming waters before before him with a satisfied smile. Reassuring himself that this had been a good idea, he made his way quickly over to the only occupied spring and slid in with a very audible sigh of pleasure. Immediately, the warm waters leached the very pains out of his skin and muscles, leaving him feeling like a cloud. His very good mood was ruined by a persistent giggling sound coming from somewhere over towards the back of the bathroom area. Naruto tried to ignore it, but as it carried on, he slowly gained a small tick mark on his forehead. Finally, snapping out of irritation, he pulled himself out of the water, this time with a very different sigh, and wrapped the towel around his waist again. With his wet feet slapping against the stone slabs of the bathing area, Naruto made his way over to the source of the irritating giggling. What he saw both perplexed and annoyed him. There was an old white-haired man giggling incessantly as he peered through the hole in the wall, as he occasionally looked away and wrote something in his small notebook. With a gulp and no small amount of embarrassment, Naruto realized the wall was the divider between the male and female paths. His embarrassment gave way to anger as he realized that Takehiko might be on the other side of the wall. "Hey, you pervert! Get away from there!" End of chapter 18.